Hi, and welcome to this edition of the Dynamics GP Blogster. Today I will continue with part 2 of Microsoft Dynamics GP, running system and company databases on Azure SQL. As I started prefacing last week, this is not something that is supported by Microsoft. This is not something that is being proven to work. Nonetheless, one of the things that I was trying to do is provide a mechanism to devise why this particular configuration does not work without necessarily saying outright it doesn't work and not providing some sort of proof of concept. To continue, today we will pick up from where we left off, and in essence, now that we've created the databases on Azure, we will actually continue with the data migration process. So we will migrate the local on-premise databases onto the Azure SQL Server. So let's see how we do that. The first thing we will notice is that my Azure databases are already in place. So I have a Dyn18 RTM database here and a TW18 database, both corresponding to my on-premise databases. In addition, just a couple of reminders. In order to set these up as databases that can talk to each other whether via database operations or stored procedures, we need to group these in an elastic pool. I have chosen an elastic standard pool just for pricing purposes. Furthermore, in order to communicate to this Azure SQL Server, we're going to need to make the IP available, and the IP from which I'm connecting to available on or recognizable by the firewall. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this database, and then I'm going to go over here to the server, and I am going to set up the firewall settings. And in particular, I'm going to set up a rule that actually allows my local IP client to be able to be recognized on that firewall. And then I'm just going to hit save here. Okay, so currently the firewall rules are updating. Now they're completed, and now my local IP address is available to be able to connect to that server. Now to prove this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply bring up SQL Server Management Studio, and I am going to come over here and simply hit connect to database engine, and I should have this server already in place and ready for a connection. I have my DynSA user, and all I gotta do is enter the password that I set up for DynSA. SQL Server now shows me that I am connected to the Azure database server, and now I can see that my Dyn18 RTM databases and my TW18 database are all in place. This is good. So let's go ahead and add my local connection. So I'm just going to connect to my local server here, and that should show me the databases that I have available on this particular machine as well. Okay, now I'm ready to perform the schema and data transfer that I need from my local on-premise machine onto the Azure SQL Server. So how do we do that? Well, for that we use the Microsoft Data Migration Assistant, and Data Migration Assistant enables you to upgrade your database platform onto SQL Server Azure. It allows you to transfer data between databases, whether those are on-premise or residing on Azure SQL, basically looking at all the objects that are related to those databases. Once I actually have this in place, what I'm going to do here is minimize my browser for a second, and I have already installed the Data Migration Assistant. The first thing we should do is basically we need to set up a new Data Migration Assistant project, and there's two types of projects that you can set up. You can set up an assessment, which I highly recommend. An assessment will basically determine what objects can be migrated and what exceptions you will end up facing that you need to correct before the migration is completed. Now, because of the time constraints that we have for this video, what I'm going to do is simply choose a migration. And I'm just going to call this my on-prem to Azure migration. Okay, my source server type will be obviously a SQL server, which is my on-premise SQL server. And the target server type will be Azure and Azure SQL database. The migration scope will be schema and data. I can also determine that I am going to transfer the schema only or the data only. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to transfer schema and data. All right, so once I create this project, now I must determine the server name that I'm going to be transferring the data from. So in this particular case, I am selecting my source server, and that will be my local machine. And I am going to authenticate to this server using my SQL credentials. To facilitate this, I'm not going to encrypt the connection, and I am going to basically not trust the server certificate. But if you guys have any concerns about security and transferring your data over the internet, you might want to enable or set up an encrypted connection, and certainly enable a trust on the server certificate itself. So I'm going to connect here, and as you can tell, it automatically lists all the databases that I have on this machine. Well, I'm interested on both the Dyn 18 RTM and the TWO 18, but I will start with the system database, which is a smaller footprint when compared to the company database. Next, I am going to choose the target server, and that target server, we can go back to SQL Server and look at it from here. That will be my mgb003.database.windows.net server. So I'm going to just go back and type that here, mgb003.database.windows.net server. And we can double check that, database.windows.net, database.windows.net. We can do a SQL authentication again. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to type in my credentials for DynSA. Okay. And again, I'm not interested in encrypting the connection at this point. I'm just going to hit connect. Okay. And you can see here now that I will basically be targeting this Dyn 18 RTM. Compatibility level is important, so if you are concerned about those things, just make sure that the compatibility level between the two databases are the same. All right, so I'm going to hit next here. This might take a little bit of time to fill in because of the size of the databases. Okay, the database assessment has been completed. So now that we have our schema assessment in place, we can take a look at what will and what will not transfer over to Azure SQL and the reasons why it might not transfer. So as you can see here, all my roles, including my Dyn group role, my reporting roles, are all functional. That is very good. I can see that the defaults, that's the GPS underscore char, the GPS underscore date, GPS int, GPS money, etc., are all transferable, so things continue to look up pretty good. I can also see that all the schemas that are created, including the Dyn group role or the Dyn group schema, are all available for transfer as well. Where things don't start to look well is on the assembly side. So basically, these assemblies cannot be created on Azure SQL, and that's a problem. That's one of the first problems we will face. And the reason why is because things like workflow and certainly the document attachment engine, the doc attach engine, depend on CLR assemblies in order to perform the task they perform. So another thing that uses CLR assemblies, for example, is Management Reporter. So those are inhibitors to have a completely functional Microsoft Dynamics GP database. We also see that there are certain stored procedures that have issues. In particular, here we have the ASI SP account lookup, and there is a blocking issue because this object has an unresolved reference to another table. And as you can see here, external references are not supported when creating a package for this particular platform. Okay. So there's a couple things we can do. We can actually make a note of these and create those stored procedures after the fact. Or we can simply attempt to have the data migration assistant create those procedures for us, but live with the fact that those procedures might have a problem after the transfer. Okay. There are other issues, for example, let's take a look at the SM verified database. And this one has a reference to an undocumented system table. The particular table that it references is the sys databases because it no longer exists after SQL Server 2005. Okay, so these are procedures that probably require some modification in order to get them to work properly. Now, if you look at the SM add record added record, this is basically a procedure that uses an old style join syntax that can have poor performance at the database compatibility level 9 or higher. Again, if you're a good SQL Server coder, I'm sure you can figure out how to replace that join for a better performing join. And at this point, I recommend you take a look at some of the work that my fellow MVP, Steve Endo, has done on SQL Server optimization. And you can visit all his material over at dynamicsgpland.blogspot.com. Okay, so there might be other issues that impede our transfer of these databases onto our Azure SQL. And it's always good that you take a look at the complete data migration assistant list. And as you can see, there's really not too many things that would impede this from working well, except for the critical things like assemblies and certain stored procedures that are using deprecated methods or deprecated features. And this is just going to create the scripting of the entire schema in order for us to proceed with the um, execution and deployment of those changes onto the data within the data migration. Very well. Now that the schema scripting is completed, we can actually proceed to deploy that schema. So here I'm going to do deployment. As you can see, this is a fairly quick task. The data migration assistant does a very good job at keeping track of the time for you. So it should give you a pretty good idea on how much time all this stuff is gonna take once it's completed. Okay, so this particular schema migration took 12 minutes and 3 seconds to deploy. We also noticed that we have 33 errors as a result of this deployment. The first one that we notice is that there is not an object called eConnectOut because it does not exist or I don't have permissions to it. So things like these need to be resolved in order to have a good, solid database deployment. And, you know, it will also prevent things from getting out of hand when you're trying to um, build your database environment and make sure that all your data is is solid and is being transferred. Now note that these particular errors refer to eConnect objects, and there might be other objects that we can't um, normally script either. For like in this particular case, I can't find a get object GUID by user. This is most likely a function. So these are the type of things that would prevent a successful usage, just in case this environment was supported, of Microsoft Dynamics GP running against a SQL Azure database. Okay, the other thing that I do recommend is you export all the deployment results just as much as you export the script that was generated. For those of us SQL Server junkies, I'm sure we can figure out some of these blocking issues and some of these extra issues that are preventing a successful and complete deployment of our schema. All right, now I'm going to proceed to the data migration portion um, of this transfer. In particular, the system lists all the tables that are going to be migrated, and you could probably choose to exclude any any table that contains no data. Because there are 277 tables, I am probably not going to go through the exercise of unchecking those that don't have any particular um, records. I wish there was an option in here to basically exclude or allow you to exclude tables with no records. But anyways, I'm going to start the data migration, and now the migration is in process. You will also get to see how many are in progress, the number of transfers that were successful, those that contain warnings, and those that effectively failed. Okay, the data migration has been completed for our system database, which means now that we can focus on performing the same tasks for our company database. I will complete this offline, and therefore we'll have a part 3 of this series that details how that process worked. And once the company database has been migrated, we'll then go ahead and try to connect Dynamics utilities and therefore Microsoft Dynamics GP to Azure SQL and see if this is even possible. For now, thank you very much and see you next time.